All right. Hi, and welcome to The Mind of a Skeptical Leftist, the podcast that covers progressivism, leftist politics, and critical thinking. And today I'm talking to Clinton.
Hello.
From the Alberta Advantage podcast.
How's it going, everybody?
I guess a good place to start is a little bit of your background and what is the goal of the Alberta Advantage podcast.
So my background is that I am a firmly upper middle class petit bourgeois son of a Alberta oil sheik. Good education, good, conservative bona fides, Roman Catholic, pretty much down the line oppressor,
Wow.
No matter how you spin it. I lived here most of my life. My birth certificate is actually Saskatchewan because that's where the hospital is in Lloydminster. And all of my family are pretty much in Saskatchewan on my side. So my basically in the south central triangle of like kind of Kindersley, Rosetown, Dinsmore, Eston, that's where my whole family is from. So my background is I moved to the west coast or left coast and went to Simon Fraser University, good, unfortunately fairly Scottish school, but one with a fairly decent track record of progressive politics. When I was at SFU, it was actually in the middle of a real neolib overhaul. Yeah, they very famously kind of dropped their marketing, dropped their coat of arms from their marketing, went to a corporate kind of like logo type, even replaced that on like the big sign out front.
Wow.
They brought in, some functionaries to, like, the thing you have to understand about SFU is that it's on a goddamn mountain. So real estate is limited. And they decided to sell as much of the endowment lands for condo complexes as they could. And that was bad. That was very, very bad. And they started raising tuition as much as they could. They started raising tuition as much as they could, much to the chagrin of, I had a really great film professor whose name is escaping me right now. And he led a bunch of protests there at the time that mostly fell on deaf ears because one of the reasons why he wanted to teach at SFU and why he worked so hard to get tenure there was because he believed it was one of the last great places in Western Canada where you could get a great education on a working class, in a working class background and not being a millionaire. But as he was there, that was slowly eroding, and it was kind of part and parcel with just like the huge influx of real estate money flowing into the Lower Mainland, the huge push for recruitment for foreign national students, mostly from Hong Kong, Beijing, other places, because they could charge them so much, and get that as going as much as possible, and everything else they just let erode and crumble. It's a very beautiful place. It's a very like brutalist castle on a hill, but it needed a lot of work, and a lot of that work was being overlooked just to build new kind of like wood and concrete and glass structures that were kind of ringed by condominiums. So I say I was pretty like rad lib like all down the line when I went in there, and when I came out, I think I was still reading and stuff like that. So after university, lived in the Lower Mainland for a little while, couldn't get a job to save my goddamn life. It's a very, very hard place to break into if you don't have some nepotistic arms reaching out to you. I shared it at the time when I was sending out like 670 resumes to get jobs, couldn't get nothing. Everything from something I'm, like slightly underqualified for to can I drive your truck? It was a pretty bad time for starting anything in the Lower Mainland around 2011. At the time, I shared an apartment with noted Canadian conservative pundit J.J. McCullough,
Okay.
who is somebody who he's wrong about everything, but also somebody I had at my wedding and would take a bullet for. He's a good guy. I hate this, hate the sin, love the sinner. Um, but
Yep. Yep.
and I've told this I've told this story elsewhere, most notably on the oh my god, Big Shiny Takes podcast, which is part of the Harbinger Network. Represent, and but yeah, he was really instrumental in my radicalization, because having somebody who was a fairly staunch neocon across the
Somebody that blatantly wrong.
yeah, exactly. It was he was extremely blatantly wrong, but he was also just like a just second to none intellect, and getting to kind of like sharpen my knife against that grindstone was very, very good for me. And yeah, I definitely wouldn't trade that. Eventually, I had to come back to Calgary just because, half because I couldn't find a job out there, and half because I met my wife, who was still living in Calgary. A mutual friend hooked us up, and so it was basically who's gonna move. And she had a job, I couldn't get a job. Even though Calgary was in a downturn, which it always seems to be in a downturn, I sent out 10 resumes versus 600 and got a job right away. So,
Okay.
and so I was back in Calgary, a place that I, wanted to get out of so badly when I was a kid. And I all of a sudden was presented with this kind of clean slate with which to do different things. And so I wanted to look at leftist politics, but then it just seemed like one crisis after another here. I got flooded out of my place during the big floods in 2013. And so we were kind of like quasi, not homeless, but like out, but displaced for a long time. And,
Right.
yeah, so we just, when you go through something like that, and steep yourself in what's going on because you have no choice to, because it's happening to you, you get a kind of a front row look at some of the inequalities, especially in Alberta. At the time, we lived in an area called Mission, and we lived in a little apartment. And right across the river from where we lived, is a community in Calgary called Roxborough. And
Okay.
just down the way is another community called Elbow Park. And if you look at the wealthiest zip codes, or the wealthiest postal codes in Canada, those two both rank highly, and they border very closely to the wealthiest postal code in Canada. For a time, it was the wealthiest, in a community called Britannia. Funny enough. And it was very funny because they during the floods, they instituted a on one of those things where it's like, on its surface, a sensible policy, where it's just like, if you got flooded out of your house, if your house was destroyed, we're going to pay to bring it up to like an acceptable level, which was like a panic bailout that I think the history books are going to be like, wow, I can't believe they did that, because it was a huge amount of money. But the problem is that it was applied like a flat tax. So the people in Roxborough were getting like $300,000, $400,000 to fix up their, $1.2 to $2.1 million houses. Whereas a lot of people, like my, like even like I was displaced for 9 months, something like that. Whereas my total government assistance at that time was, I believe, $600. Whereas some of these rich people across the river were getting, like I said, like mid six figures.
Big fat checks.
and complaining that it wasn't enough, because like they're just like, I had hardwood floors, and you are paying me the equivalent of replacing that with linoleum, and that was the big problem. And it was just so that period, I look back on that period as like a real kind of radicalizing point there, where Alberta politics was just so obviously out of whack that it's good to see. And you look at the infrastructure of Calgary at the time, there was like the flood crested its banks in a 100-year storm, and they needed to get Canadian forces to come out just to save power to about 200,000 people, because they built a substation like in the fucking riverbank, like to save money. And so And so where we were holed up and stuff like that, you have like Canadian Forces helicopters buzzing around and stuff like that just to make sure that this substation doesn't slip into the fucking river. So that was that was probably like a big radicalizing point for me there. A couple of years later, I met what was already a well-established Alberta Advantage podcast, and they knew my work as a writer, and because I had waged a year-long war for them to notice me, secret war, and they wanted to do a newsletter, and they essentially gave me carte blanche to run that. I've been on a few episodes of the podcast, but I have just like a terrible case of adult onset, ADHD, and just cannot stop joking for long enough for them to get their like very rigorous and like well-researched stuff out. Because I'm just like, hey guys, you want to make some jokes, and they're just like, no, we want to get through this shit, and we want to do our thing. So I'm on the podcast sparingly, I guess is what you would say, and
that's fair.
Yeah, now I've been talking for and now you can tell why, because I've been talking for 10 minutes straight without giving you a chance to speak.
Oh no, that's perfect. That's exactly what I do with this show.
Yeah.
That is one of the things that I've noticed about the Alberta Advantage podcast is that it's very rigorously researched and it like scripted out in very like I used to script out my segment for my old show. But it was a lot of work.
That's probably one of the things about the Alberta Advantage that most people probably aren't privy to is the insane amount of hours that the collective of people put into the research and stuff like that. A, because it seems so casual, and B, because they're on the podcast side, they're incredibly prolific. But they really know their stuff, and they really put a lot of work into it. And there's what I think is a very useful strain of not wanting it just to be a bunch of like white males like sitting around making jokes and talking about leftism, which is a very good and very entertaining strain of the podcast community. But it's represented. That's enough.
Yeah, it's well represented. Exactly.
Yeah. And every now and then I'm just like, we should do a show about this, but the inevitable thing I get back to is the wisdom that Alberta Advantage should probably try to like, talk about something of substance. So that's why I have my little fiefdom over in the newsletter where we can remain substance free.
Is that what the newsletter does?
Yeah, that's right. I try to give those guys, if they want to come and write and they can do something like substance free. I'm kind of like the B-sides of the entire thing, like the remix album, reanimation to their Meteora. Or no, wait, was reanimation was the remix album to Hybrid Theory? I can't remember. Holy shit. They're gonna take my Linkin Park Underground fan club card away. Holy shit!
Yeah. I'm sure you'll survive without.
I don't know that I will, honestly. It's very key to my identity. So.
Okay. Yeah. So speaking of your identity, what brand of leftist are you?
I think I'm a pretty down the line orthodox Marxist.
Okay.
My colleagues can enunciate their politics much better than I can. I definitely like whenever I find myself like saying we should do this and that and whatever, I still just come back to the only practical way forward being the creation of labor power. And that's pretty much it. If I had to nutshell my politics, it's that I had a very comfortable life growing up. I was fairly surrounded, family, friends, yada yada yada, of people who were fairly hand to mouth, and so I very much grew up with a discomfort of being very comfortable and in and among a lot of people who are very not comfortable. And so if I had to nutshell my politics, it would be that I think everybody should be as comfortable as I was and am. And so everything So all of my politics are uh, what is the way to get there. And so every time I go down a rabbit hole, and every time I go down a rabbit hole, it just brings me back to kind of organized labor Marxism. Pretty much it. I'm not fancy. I don't go with all these this anarchism or this like
Right.
late period bespoke ceramic state socialisms or anything like that. Okay,
You're
just
not
down the
a
line.
Trotskyist or
No, just like solid like pig iron and wool jacket Marxism.
yeah, that's respectable.
Yeah, that's what I'm aiming for here. Yeah.
I yeah, it's interesting that you say that you kind of grew up really comfortable, and you still came out the other side like a leftist. Like too often, it seems like people who grow up with that comfort, they're fine just to stay that way.
Yeah, and I think a big reason for why that is because of the province of Saskatchewan. Both my parents grew up fairly hard scrabble, and quite frankly, it's something that I don't know why I've never really looked into it as much as I should. But the province very much failed them, and it reverberated down through their entire lives. My mom's father passed away quite young, and so she and her three sisters and three siblings, they really had to literally work to not lose the farm, literally not lose the
Right.
farm. My dad was if she was kind of like the kind of grapes of wrath, farmer type. He was the opposite, or he was on periodically on the other side of kind of like urban poverty or suburban poverty in Saskatchewan, where his dad and his great uncle raised him. And at times they were farming, at times they owned like the local hotel and pub, but they were always you know only one or two generations away from Ireland, and only, so rife with like kind of alcoholism reverberating down, but always very hand to mouth, if not in absolute poverty. Like real, some real, as much as you can be in poverty in Canada in like having come from homesteaders. But it still wasn't a good situation. I don't I don't know why I don't pick up a goddamn book and learn the political history of Saskatchewan through the 50s, 60s, and 70s. But whatever social safety net was there for kind of rural Saskatchewan, it very much missed them.
And I don't know if there was much.
And so that manifested in my dad having like a really overcompensating work ethic, that essentially turned into just piled on top of what other issues he had. He just worked himself into an early grave. Very much so. Like he didn't finish high school. He had a GED, and so when he entered blue collar and then white collar work, he had the neurosis that his only contribution would be to work as hard as the next person plus 50%. Like the movie Kingpin. We do everything you do plus a half. And so that, and basically just like, I don't know, like maybe Donald Trump's right and you only have like finite heartbeats in a life. And so that meant, yeah, exactly. It's just like a single HP bar and no potions. And so he passed. Yeah. So he died at 55 of wow. He died at 55 of a heart attack. That's 5 years ago, I guess. And that was pretty much the final nail for me, which is just like, it's like, okay, what lesson can we take from this just senseless death? And the lesson I took from it was that if he could have worked 8-hour days instead of 12, if there was a structure in place to tell him that was okay and get through to him, maybe he'd still be around. And
Right.
and so that and again, like all roads for me, it comes down to how can everyone, including my dad in the past, how can he grow up as comfortable as I did without, shaving off the last 25, 30 years of your life.
My dad is 70. He's turning 71 this year.
Yeah.
And he still has that same, like, I think that might be a Saskatchewan thing. Maybe it's just that generation. I don't know. But he's got that work ethic too, where like when I was even a young adult, he was working from like spraying crops from 4 a.m. until 10 p.m.
Yeah.
And then he's doing that every day during the summer. And it's just like, it seems like you're killing yourself. You're working so hard.
Yeah, there's this, like, you follow the strain of the CCF up through Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba, essentially like Calvinists that came up from the United States and quickly determined that they wanted a universal medical system. But I think that was honestly just so that they didn't have to pay for their kids when they got hurt on the farm so they could work harder. Like that's always my thing. It's just like everybody's just like, look at these labor leaders who wanted a collective system of medicine, and I'm just like, nah, man, they just didn't want to pay for the cast when dumbass over there slipped and fell on a auger and needed to get stitched up. They just didn't want to pay for that shit. So I do think that strain of collectivism was there, but I think it runs on a deep strain of to live is to work, and the only way to be a respectable member of society is to produce economically.
It's something that I actually struggle with myself. I work and for a long time that was just who I was a person who worked.
Yeah.
And until I reached a point where I was like, but what about other things? What about like living with a family and like actually knowing your kids and like stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of find and without even really noticing it, I did that right off the bat in university. I was just like, I'm gonna make it in a similar way. And then before, I picked up this, I picked up that, and then and before I knew it, like adding on to university and like the numerous like jobs and stuff I had, with always in the background being like, this is building the resume, this is the time to do this. I was putting in, I don't want to call it an 18 or 20-hour day because it just never really stopped. It was just like, how much can I produce in the time where I decide not to sleep? And then when do I have to go to sleep and stuff like that? And it wasn't healthy. And I kind of recognized that. And in the end, it didn't pay dividends. I was still, by the end of the university, my paying gigs dried up with all of Canadian journalism. Freelancing wasn't gonna be it, and we hadn't hit the point where I could try to like scratch out like a Substack, Patreon, podcasting.
Right.
That just wasn't mainstreamed yet, so it never occurred to me to try anything like that. Like all the doing school, going to university, that didn't pan out. And then I added, a whole other full-time gig on top of full-time university. And then when it came down to it, I was still, sending out resumes into the void and coming away with quote unquote nothing, because to work is to be respectable, and it just didn't work. I think
that's great.
Just like all those hours of quote unquote like building the resume, and then I was still got launched into a work world that was not having it.
Like they look for what they can extract from you when they can extract it, and if they don't need anything from you at the moment, then I guess too bad, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And society doesn't care. Like, we'll just let you starve.
Yeah, and that was like at the end of his life, my dad had worked at the same company for like 20 years almost, I think. And like, just can you imagine anybody ever doing that or being allowed to do that? Like, it's just, you wouldn't be I think there's a lot of ink spilled on just like, well, these millennials, these Zoomers, they don't stay with one university. They're or with one job, they're very mercenary. It's just like, well, A, if we're fucked up, you're to blame. B, pretty much the only way to advance in any kind of economic way is to shift from place to place, because if they have you, they don't promote you, and if they promote you, they just expect you to take on more responsibility with no increase in pay. I remember working at one place and working at the very bottom of the pay scale, and then they were going to add an entire new. I was doing something completely different. I was doing like program development for a nonprofit, and then they were just like, "We think that you got potential, and you are going to you're going to start doing corporate outreach and development, and you're going to start going to people and seeking donations in the corporate world." And I was like, A, I have no background in that. B, that's somebody's entire position at another place. So are we talking about remuneration here at all? And my CEO at that nonprofit, like literally just like her whole body just sank, and she was like, I'm so disappointed that you would ask me something like that.
I expect you to work for free.
I couldn't believe it, because I had like I knew this was coming, and so I had like kind of like said, look, like anytime I read these getting ahead in business things, they're just like, if they're going to start giving you a bunch more stuff, you got to say, no, fuck you, pay me. And so I thought I was doing like one of the first like truly adult things in my life, which was advocating for, like the pay for what work I've produced. And, I got like a full, like mom dressing down.
Wow.
And I don't mean that, I don't mean that to be sexist, but literally she took on like all the like I'm so disappointed in you, like very much the sounded like
very much if your mother was like
sounded like what something my mom would say. Like, yeah, it was really
oh, geez.
really, really bizarre. And even just that conversation between two colleagues, or I guess you could say a supervisor and a non-union labor, that pretty much spelled the end of our working relationship, and turned into the end of my working there, because she was so aghast that I wouldn't have an entire second position worth of work added on to my already extremely marginal salary.
Yeah, it's so commonplace to just add more work onto somebody. The company I no longer work for.
Yeah.
They bought out the company that I had previously worked for.
Yeah.
So I was working in the oil field.
Yeah.
And so the new company buys us and immediately starts firing people.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, all that really means is that the rest of us have to do twice as much work in the same amount of time for no extra money. So it's like,
yeah, lovely. Thanks, guys.
I'm glad you could afford to buy this giant facility.
Yeah, this absolutely
can't pay my
and that's that shit happens so much, especially I don't know where you worked, but man, some of the shit I've seen in southeastern Saskatchewan, like kind of Manitoba, in that kind of kitty corner there, Manitoba, Montana. Yeah, I guess around just north of the U.S. border. Those facilities were far and away the worst facilities we ever seen. Like, just no upgrades whatsoever. A super entrenched kind of like management down there that just would not it was weird, because like most of the shops I worked with were non-union shops. They had like a collective. They created a collective front against management, but their collective front was like almost like, don't change anything, don't pay us any more, don't pay us any less, just stay out of our way. No, we will not fix that. No, we do not care if that is environmentally bad. It was really weird. It was like rolling into, what it was like? It was like I was Kevin Costner, and they were like a floating platform tribe in Waterworld. And they were just like, fuck off. We don't want anything to do with you. You have gills on your neck. Go away. Yes, we know we're all going to die. Don't care. Fuck off. And those facilities by far, like I feel like 200 years from now, when kind of like what has been done to Western Canada by oil and gas is tallied, everybody's going to look at southeastern Saskatchewan as Mordor. Like, just it's going to be like people talk all the time about the northern Alberta's oil sands and the impact to the environs around there, but southeastern Saskatchewan's just as bad.
Oh yeah, it's pump jack, pump jack, pump jack, pump jack, pump jack. You can't go a mile without seeing like 15 pump jacks.
Yeah, I just every time I think about what's leaching into the soil around there from 50s containment ponds that are lined only with clay, I'm just like, oh fuck, can't have it. Do you ever have when you're working out in the oil field there? Have you ever had one of those awkward moments where somebody finds very old infrastructure emblazoned with great big swastikas?
No.
Yeah, there's like this like little period there where just like a little bit of imported German equipment got into the Alberta oil fields and stuff like that, and it's very like kind of hushed, like almost like shadowy black van shows up to confiscate that material type shit.
Wow,
it's very funny. Every now and then somebody will like pull up like a block valve or whatever that's just like manufactured in Germany, great big swastika on it, and everybody and it's one of those things that's only kind of like whispered about a little bit.
I believe it. Yeah. I know. There's probably a disturbing number of guys that work out there that would be fine with that.
Yeah, and it's an interesting, and I mean, you know what I'm talking about. I'm preaching to the choir here, but like those guys, they get kind of fucked over by kind of liberal governments, left, right, and center, and so they got this one thing that's going right for them and is actually paying the bills, and so that makes them a ripe fruit for any kind of ideology that will explain to them why that might be taken away. And if somebody comes and says that, people crossing the border illegally in Quebec are getting 5-star hotels, and that's the reason why they need to tax oil more from Ottawa, and that's the reason why you may not, get to pay your mortgage on your house in Rimbey, Saskatchewan, like, that's a way to explain the world. That's a way to explain why they might be suddenly immiserated, and we don't. I think the best fertilizer for reactionary ideology is desperation, and if you could create a situation where you're not just your basic survival, but your happiness is not linked to your employment status, I think that would be better overall for, people not turning into Nazis.
Yep. Yeah, that's accurate. It's interesting. When I first started working in the oil field, I kind of went into it not knowing what to expect, but getting paid a lot of money for a position that I was not particularly sure what to do in, but they will train you and they will pay for your tickets. And like, I wasn't a big union supporter at the time. Mm-hmm. And I'm going, well, if every company paid their employees like this, why would you need unions? Right? Mm-hmm. Like, I'm starting at $25 an hour and I don't know what I'm doing. So
it's like, welcome to the good times. Wait until you see the bad times.
Exactly. And then not much later, it's, oh yeah, by the way, you have to do all of these things and you have to stay after, and after a few night shifts, you start to lose your mind, and kind of like if you're not doing unpaid labor, to just like, there's this idea of like, we just get the job done. And I sometimes refer to it as Ford truck commercial masculinity, where it's just like, you're not complaining, you're not asking for any money or whatever. It's just, there's a job that needs done. The unspoken part there is your boss needs it done. And you're just going to get it done. And then the unspoken part there is without proper remuneration. Yeah. And if you don't do that, because that's what men do in America, it's like, in the unspoken there part, it's like, this isn't America. And why is that
is that masculinity? That I honestly think that that's like one of the driving forces of kind of Western Canadian masculinity is like, no, we just get it done and we take the hits and the punches, and it kind of feeds into this weird martyrdom of work that is particularly thick in Western Canadian oil and gas. This just like, do you know how hard I work? Like,
Yeah.
how would how could you bring any other problems to me at the homestead when I go and do this all day? And to a certain extent, they're right. Like oil and gas, like if you see videos from 2021 of people fucking swinging tongs or
Oh,
doing
yeah,
anything on
yeah.
an oil field, especially in a Canadian winter and stuff like that, like
Oh, yeah.
it's fucking grueling. It's
Well,
fucking
I
grueling
mean,
and it deserves protection.
Yep. We just had that cold snap last 2 weeks ago
Yeah.
because of the polar vortex or whatever. And there's guys working rigs out in that cold. Like it's minus 45 with the wind chill, minus 48 with the wind chill. And they're out there bundled up in their Helly Hansen gear and, you know.
And you talk to any of them, and you know this because you've been out there, and you talk to any of them, and they're just like the warmest pair of gloves you have is eventually you don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
Eventually you don't notice the cold, which is fucking
not safe.
Just brutal. It's brutal, but it is carried with this learned air of nobility because you just get it done, and almost like an appreciation for the patronage of their employers.
Right.
And so that is actually oil and gas field, like oil field workers, is actually one of the areas where I wonder if improved education would make a difference if you let these people know that oil and gas compared to other industries has an extremely low percentage of revenue going to or a labor share of revenue. It's like 25 to 30%, whereas
Right.
like, other ones with more developed labor sectors have are closer to like 40, 50%. Like I wonder if you, but then you could even just me saying that and you hearing me say that, that's not the case. We could tell them all the facts until they're blue in the face, and they wouldn't believe you.
Well, they aren't comparing themselves to how much their bosses profit, right? They're comparing themselves to their neighbor down the street who's making $15 an hour less than them.
Yeah.
And they're going, well, I'm doing really good. Like I need to stay at this job and I really need to appreciate where I'm at instead of seeing it as only 20% of profits and like, I need to fight for more. And
Yeah. And there's that being hand to mouth is very useful for capital. If there was a protracted, or if there was a non-protracted like labor interruption for a collective action of 2 weeks, how many people would be fucked? If it was 2 months, how many people's entire financial situation would be obliterated?
Oh yeah.
I know a lot of people.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people. You know a lot of people that like even just like the idea of rocking the boat is not unappetizing. It's terminal. It's survival.
Yep.
It's whether like once that mortgage goes sour, you can't go back.
That's right. Yeah.
Like they don't let you do a do-over. They don't say, oh yeah, like we'll see what happens on the other end of your labor action.
The way that like we used to joke, cause I grew up in Weyburn, Saskatchewan.
Oh, my cousins live there right now.
Okay. Yeah. So it's an oil town. and we used to watch like the guys, they'd go and work when things were good. And then when things were bad, they'd sell everything they bought during the time that times were good. And it was always this up and down of constantly buying everything they could because that's the culture. That's what they're, fed. That's what you do when you have money. Yeah. And then you have to get rid of it. You got to pay the bills. You got to survive so you don't lose your house.
And it's not even that much money. A lot of this is just like, no, I now have a, small amount of money with which to accrue debt.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Like
that's right. Like I
know,
have credit now.
yeah, I have credit now. I can like I can buy this and that and stuff like that, because even though they're getting paid relatively well for the area, those time periods are small enough that there's those periods of relative wealth are small enough, and their needs are large enough that money has to go out just as quickly as it comes in.
Yep, that's right.
And so people, that's kind of one of the the vectors where I'd shut down immediately, is they're just like, well, these rig pigs, they bought, lifted trucks and yada yada. A, they need the lifted truck to get to the fucking site.
A lot of times, yeah.
B,
you can't drive a car in there.
yeah, and B is just like, they're typically not just throwing their money away. Like that's a harmful stereotype. Like a lot of people are just like,
yeah,
no, like that's what if you have money, if you have a going concern in your early 20s, all this, it is how society is set up, that you accrue a fuck ton of debt in your early 20s to start a life, which is horrible. Like anybody who owns, who has a home and a mortgage and a wife and a couple of kids, like how fast that accrues. And it's not that that was like everybody in my high school. We were getting pushed very, very hard into trades because you could walk into a 3-figure salary very quickly. And a lot of those people were really hard done by, because when we got out of high school in 2007, what happened in 2008?
Yeah,
they all got their 3-figure jobs, and then they all went away immediately, right after a bunch of them started lives. Now, thankfully, because they're millennials in 2007, because things were so bad in the real estate market, most of my friends who did that kind of thing did not get strapped with a mortgage they couldn't afford. So call that the only silver lining of an overheated real estate market, in that even with their suddenly huge salaries, they could not find themselves in a mortgage way. So dodged a bullet there. But a lot of them, again, June 2007, we graduate. September 2007, a lot of them working in Fort McMurray. May 2008, a lot of them on their ass.
Yeah.
Because of forces completely out of their control. Exactly. Because places couldn't get any credit anymore to dig a fucking well.
Yeah. And it's a slightly different situation, this last oil boom and bust.
Yeah.
But it is very similar around here, like where like guys, they go out, they get these jobs, they get a house, they have a mortgage, they got to pay for their truck, not their, like they got to pay for their rig truck that they're buying, they're hauling oil with or whatever.
Yeah.
And they have like all these bills, all these mortgages and loans. And then a particular company, I'm not going to say the name on the air or whatever, but a particular company. A particular company decided that, okay, well, we have all of the business in this area, and we are now going to lower the rates we're paying for trucking down to cost. Like, you don't get to make profit on your trucking job.
Yep.
And so so many guys, they had to quit trucking in the oil industry and start doing gravel or grain if they could,
It's just like, when was the last time in Canadian history that having a Class 1 license left you on your ass? Like, it takes real coordination and like a broken system to make it so that somebody with a Class 1 license can't pay their mortgage. Like, when was the last time that was an unreliable gig ever?
Yeah.
And the next time will be with automated trucking. But
it's just because specific companies decide, well, we don't want to pay you the rate that it costs. And so
you're going to do this. You're going to do this for us, or when the money does flow again, you're not going to work for us.
Yep.
Yuck. Yeah. Holy shit. That's where my dad started. My dad had a very, very strange career path, in that he was a high school dropout, worked for Edmonton Telephone for a while. His only union gig the whole time. Worked construction. Then he went back. He bought a couple sections and farmed, and then he sold that. And he went trucking out of Kindersley, and then he eventually was eventually started managing trucks for Murphy's for Spur. And then he got headhunted to move to Calgary when I was about 7, and then worked behind various desks doing fucking everything, man. Trucking, facilities, acquisitions, wherever they needed him. At the end, I think the last major project he worked on was rail.
Oh, geez.
And he worked on rail, and his southern corporate master said, build a fucking rail yard at Rimbey, Saskatchewan. And he was just like, why the fuck would we do that? That's not going to make any money. That's a very stupid idea, and we shouldn't do that. And they're just like, build us a rail yard in Rimbey, Saskatchewan. And he's like, okay, fine.
Whatever, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, I'm all over that. And then sure enough, like by the time he passed away, that rail terminal was pretty much already in mothballs. I think it was maybe seeing one engine a day, maybe. So it was it's just funny. But hey, I just pumped a bunch of capital into fucking Rimbey, Saskatchewan, I suppose. I'm sure
for a moment.
Yeah, I'm sure Rimbey and Kindersley appreciated the opportunity to build another fucking hotel. That's all
that's going to be closed
right now.
Yeah. A lot of these little towns out in the southeast here have definitely like they got new hotels and new businesses and new subways and new, all this like Subway sandwich shops and all these other things. And now half of those things are closed because oil went down. And we can't cut into profits, right?
Yeah. That's my favorite thing to do when you're talking to somebody and they're calling you a pinko. Talk to them about how much you hate Obama for all the regular reasons, but then also tell them about how he was so gung ho about shale oil in the Dakotas. That now all that shale goes. And all those boom towns are just like a fucking flat, like, or just like a light switch on off. Oil goes over, Brent goes over 60 US, turn it on, boom town. As soon as you do that, production at the states is too high, prices go down, turn it off, everybody's out of work.
Yep.
And essentially has put like an American-based ceiling on very easy to get crude. And you don't need to move it over to Canadian border. You don't need a better refinery for our shitty oil.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
How the more you learn about Western Canadian oil and its circumstances in a global market, and you're just like, how the fuck? Like, the only overhead now is red tape. The only overhead now to find is having a captured government lowering your liability on the government side, and then you can take your profits from there. But in terms of actually selling the product itself, it's the same in Kentucky right now, where there was that one like eccentric billionaire who was just buying up all these shuttered coal plants, and then as soon as Donald Trump passed like a big tax break thing, he started hiring people at these mines, and they're like, oh god, that only lasted for about 2 years and petered out before the end of Trump's term. But this guy, he was smart enough to know that between the tax breaks and the just completely buck wild financialization of absolutely everything in the United States, huge pools of liquidity still left over from fucking TARP, and every future bailout that has been and will be, he just knew that he could turn that into enough revenue to turn a profit, the only profits that matter, which is to shareholders, and
right.
get enough moving cash to move his share price, maintain a dividend, and do buybacks. And all that overhead, all that revenue came from decreased tax liability, and not because the fucking rocks appreciably changed in value upward, just because.
Right.
And they're just like, we can't make any money because the taxes are too high. Like, yeah, that's absolutely correct. So all you have to do is capture the government to get the taxes lower, and then you can make that profit.
Right.
It's not good. It's very bad. And then all of a sudden
you have fucks over everybody else.
Yeah, you can't build tanks. You can't fucking build tanks big enough in Alberta right now. All the tanks are fucking full. And they're periodically like that, like once a year, where it's just like nobody knows where to put stuff. Everything's stuck in pipes because you can't find a fucking tank anywhere in the country to put it.
Yeah.
Okay. And they're like, oh, yeah, we need a pipeline for that. And it's just like, no, you need to stop pumping as much because nobody wants to buy it.
Turn the tap off for a minute.
Yeah.
But you can't do that either.
No, because then they got a gun to your head saying like, "Oh, those are some nice jobs you have in your province. We want anything to happen to those."
Shame if something happened to them.
Yeah, fuck. That's probably been the biggest fucking crazy thing in my lifetime is like growing up learning the fundamentals of how like a financial like capitalism system works. Learn about the idea of profits. Sell a product, you make a profit, deliver those profits to shareholders, and then having that entire concept become completely unchained in the course of my in the course of my lifetime,
Right.
where the biggest company on earth, for the first 15 years of its life, Amazon like didn't declare profits.
Right.
It had a fuck ton of revenue and it was losing money, but it's all how you look at that and how you work with those revenues. And because there's so much just cheap credit out there, you can as long as you just keep it flowing, it's just like it's just like a hugely deadly, just watching everything turn into a huge deadly game of musical chairs has been very, very scary in my lifetime.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
Was there anything about the Alberta Advantage newsletter and podcast that you didn't mention that you would like to?
No, it's really good. Everybody that works for it is really handsome or pretty.
They're all wonderful, amazing people, obviously.
Yeah, they're all true leftists. They're all revisionists. They're all beautiful people. They're all assholes. We do a splitting. Yeah, we spend our days. We do a colonialism. We do a racism. We do a splitting the party. It's great. We have a lot of sycophants for Alberta NDP out here after they won. A floater over the plate one year. Right. So I think the Alberta Advantage is really great if you want to actually hold a somewhat leftist party to account. I think that's probably our best function of what we do right now. Obviously, it's a great educational resource, but there's not a lot of leftist media in Alberta, and there's not a lot of leftist media in Alberta that will actually be like, actually, the NDP in Alberta sucks ass. And they tell their staff to go attend pro-pipeline rallies, and they're fucking Shannon Phillips is out here, bragging that they give no wage increases to union employees. And yeah, we love them. We love them to death. We love making fun of them because they're fucking useless.
Okay, so
Alberta Advantage, good. Come check us out and check out the Harbinge Network. We're a network of podcasts and YouTubers and writers and stuff like that are trying to create a counterpoint to the Laurentian elites, the post media bond payers with journalistic aspects. Come check out some of the great content on there. Oh man, especially in Western Canada, your taxes aren't high. Your taxes are very low, actually, especially if you're in Alberta. People are just like, oh, we're taxed too much. It's just like, if it's a sizable chunk of your money, it's because of your employer, not because of your country.
Right.
Alberta has one of the lowest, smallest taxation regimes in North America out of most U.S. states and all Canadian provinces, pretty much. Calgary, Toronto, Vancouver, and Edmonton, and Saskatoon. Saskatoon is surprisingly low, but the biggest cities in Canada all have the smallest residential taxation on $1 million house.
Wow.
$1 million house in Calgary, you'll spend about $6,500 in residential taxes a year. In Hamilton, Ontario, you'll spend $12. Tell me how that works. In Alberta, no PST. In Alberta, if you run a small business, you're barely bothered.
Right.
And every municipal council in Alberta, if you run a small business, they will treat you like clergy.
Right.
Like you are an estate unto yourself. You're great. You're in good shape tax wise.
Yeah.
You're totally fine. And if the taxation regime in Alberta makes it so that your margins or your profits or whatever you want are untenable for continuing that business, you're doing bad. You're doing a bad job. because it should be the smallest thing in your mind. And
You would
everybody,
absolutely be failing anywhere else in the world.
yeah, everybody in Alberta is just like, the way I'm going to make profit is to appeal to a friendly government, and I get it because it's effective,
It works, yeah.
um, but no, you're leeches and you should be stopped. There's my counter propaganda for Albertans.
There we go. Sounds good.
Yep.
I even I've talked to a lot of Americans, and even our like our income taxes and stuff. Like, I constantly have heard people saying like, "Oh, I could afford this if I wasn't paying so much in tax. I could do this if I wasn't paying so much in tax." And we're not paying that much more than people in Texas who have no infrastructure for their power grid, and it's all privatized, and they don't have health care. Like, we're doing okay tax wise. That's not the problem here.
Their idea of taxes is so narrow. Like,
Right.
like a fee is a tax. If you chop off a toe and have to go to a U.S. Hospital with no insurance, like, that bill is a tax.
Yeah.
Like everything, like, even like, think about having a kid in the United States.
Oh,
I just had a kid here about 2 weeks ago, just a little over 2 weeks ago. And
congratulations.
thank you. Appreciate it. Penelope, she's great. So the total I have paid to two hospitals for my two kids is $150. And that was just because we opted for a private room,
Right.
because there were some available when we had our first. And I probably shouldn't have even done that, because the room was actually worse than a shared one, because it was built in Klein area. That guy's an asshole. But
right. Yeah.
but like, you go down, like, if you look at it, there's so much documentation looking at the same for the United States. You're talking about $20,000
Yeah.
for some people. You know, if they just walk in and have a kid, like, can you imagine the psychic toll of doing anything in your life in the United States? It'd be like, it'd be completely paralyzing. And that's why I was kind of giving them a grain of salt for some of the craziness that they have, because they're just like, just lives of just
pure stress.
Like, yeah, it must be like walking in a minefield every fucking day. Just like, anything that brings me joy could bring me to bankruptcy. Oof,
yeah.
Jesus Christ. Just thinking about, I think about it every now and then, like, when I think about Calgary, or when I think about Canada only having like 4 worthwhile cities, and I think about Canada and all the like weird bullshit that goes on, and, you know, rising Ukrainian fascism, and you know, everything else,
all the things.
Jason Kenney's fucking face. When I think about absolutely everything in Canada, I'm just, every now and then, I'm just like, yeah, hell yeah. And I dial up Zillow and I look at comparable houses in Denver. And then I get about halfway there and I'm just like, oh no, wait, that would suck. Oh God, I can't live down there.
Yeah, no.
I don't care if I can go see Broncos games. I'd have to buy, you know how much I would have to spend in health insurance with all my myriad problems and obesity. Ugh.
Jesus. One problem is too many in the U.S. you can't have a health problem.
Yeah, if you're not just like a down the line healthy white guy, like, it's very expensive to be an American. Yeah. Let me talk about one of my comrade mates here, Dr. Roberta Lexier. She teaches at Mount Royal University. I want you to Google her name. I want you to read everything she's written. She's written for, you know, everything from Jacobin to, you know, books. Nice. And everything she writes is great. Everything she writes about Canada is greater. And she's just an overall mensch. And Alberta Advantage is very, very lucky to have her as of the last, like 6-7 months that she's been doing stuff with us, even though we were fans for much longer. And you know, I could probably, from where my house is, I could probably hit her office with a potato gun from my front yard, which is nice. So I can just go and say hello if the plague ever ends. Right. But yeah, she's great. You should go check out her shit immediately. Nice. She recently just wrote a piece for Jacobin about why the NDP should stop fucking muling and actually win something. And it's great. I think it was for Jacobin. Maybe it was Passage. and enemies. God, there's so many. Trevor Tom, but he's an economist that writes a lot about Alberta, and he's an economist here, and he's a smart guy. Like he knows what he's doing and stuff like that. But he, at his heart, is an economist, and he really enjoys the dismal science of economy, and so he is sensible. He is popular. He has a platform, and he just will not stop beating the fucking drum of debt zero provinces.
Ugh.
Paying down the deficit. He's just like he sees fucking Moody's and Moody's, credit downgrades in his fucking nightmares. But he's so beloved on the internet and kind of by like centrists that he just keeps using his giant CBC dick to slap us with the deficit every fucking time.
How do we defeat this narrative that the deficit is some big deal?
Well, you can't. You can't, because at its core, his argument is reasonable. These things that the government is doing will not bring us to a zero deficit or zero provincial debt. And it's just that the premise of doing so is so fucking stupid. It breaks my brain every day, because he's constantly writing about it, and he's probably the most retweeted, most read financial expert in the province. And so it bakes into the Alberta identity that the best possible fiscal responsibility in Alberta is to get to zero provincial debt. And the last time we did it, it fucking broke this place. All the nurses ran away, and we hadn't enough hospitals, and even the fucking conservatives were just like, oh shit, we're in a province with no things in it. We should probably buy some things. And yet he still bows to fucking the idea of Ralph Klein, a person who couldn't get into the Canadian Forces and was a TV news broadcaster, which is, and trust me, I have a degree in English. Being a TV broadcaster, that is reading for a living. There is a teleprompter there, and he doesn't write it. I have a degree in reading. I have a degree in reading. He had a career in reading. He was not a smart man, and so this fucking just guy who was not dry for a single minute of his adult life, he decided that you should run a macroeconomy on the size of Alberta like a household and get down to zero debt. And it fucking breaks my brain every time I think about it. It's like, no, stop. If you build a hospital, people have to work there. And then there's more money because people work there. It's like, pay your taxes. It's like, then you can do more. Like,
it's the idea that you run a country or a province like your home is like, I've lost friends over this argument. No, it's just so dumb.
and I get why it appeals to people. It feels good. It makes people feel like something that they do well could be applied in a more complex situation, and that feels good. Yeah. And that is true in some cases, but fucking finance is not one of them. No. Like macroeconomics is not one of them. If you build a shed, the value of your shed drops precipitously with the life of that shed. But if you build a university, the value of that university typically rises for a long time. That's not going down. Yeah. Like there's almost nothing you can do aside from like making meth that can make a shed more valuable over time. But there is a lot of things you can do to make a university more valuable over time and create revenues for you to use to build other shit. Like it's just, the counter to it is almost too simple. I think because like I would say that about those universities, and then somebody else would say to me, it's just like, can't tax everybody. You can only tax people so much. Then you run out of other people's money. And it's like the counters to each that we have been taught through our entire lives are almost too simplistic. It's by the time people reach maturity in Western Canada, in Alberta in particular, I feel like that script is baked into their brains. Yeah. That if you want to spend public money, you're an asshole. You're a fucking asshole that is just spendy. and
then you have to raise taxes. Right?
You could not tell an Albertan on a stretcher in an emergency room that spending public money is a good idea. Some of them.
Right.
They could not be convinced if their fucking leg was hanging on by a thread. Some of them that I've met.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but some. So,
but many.
Trevor Tom, maybe he's just because he's on like the front of my brain lately, but he has a huge platform to do economics, to like easily the most read economist in Alberta, and he just perpetuates the same dog shit frame every day of his life. I hate it.
All right. So where can people find your stuff?
You can find me at albertaadvantage.substack.com or at albertaadvantagepod.com. I don't know. You can find the podcast. You'll be fine. And that's where I am. Usually I'm on the internet at Stoic Romance. I'm on the tweets. I'm on the bleeps. I'm on the bloops.
Well, thank you for joining me.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, folks, that's it for this episode. Thanks so much for listening. Remember to share the show with your friends and on social media. Thank you to everyone who supports this show on Patreon. Every dollar I get makes it so that I can feed my family and keep a roof over our head. So it's really, really appreciated. If you can contribute or want to contribute, you can do that at patreon.com/skepticalleftist, or you can send me money at paypal.me/brainstormpodcast. If you can't contribute financially, that is fine. A 5-star rating and a review on your podcast app of choice or on one of the podcast review sites like Podchaser would be great. If you want to find more from me, then make sure to check out my Linktree at linktr.ee/skepticalcory. You can find all my social media stuff there, as well as links to my other shows, which include Skeptarchy, which is a panel show I do with some very smart people, From Many People's Strength, which is a podcast about Saskatchewan politics, and The Feminist Family, which I do with my partner. My Twitter is @HardcoreSkeptic, and my Facebook page is The Mind of a Skeptical Leftist, or you can send me a friend request at facebook.com/CJBrainstorm. I do accept most friend requests. Thank you so much for listening or watching, and remember that the truth does seem to have a left-wing bent.